The alarm bells rang across the massive bridge of the ESS Defiance as Admiral Jake Morrison stood watching the stars through the main viewing screen. The ship was floating in space near Jupiter, waiting for orders from Earth Command when the emergency message came through the deep space communication array. Commander Lisa Rodriguez rushed to her station and began working on the incoming signal with her hands. Moving quickly across the control panels, the message was scrambled and broken, but Lisa could tell it was coming from somewhere far away in the galaxy. She worked for 20 minutes before the computer could clean up the signal enough to understand what someone was trying to tell them. When the words became clear, Jake felt his heart beat faster because this was the call they had been waiting. For their whole lives, the Altarian Republic was asking for help, and they sounded desperate. Their homeworld Altaria Prime was under attack by the Zethkar Dominion, and their defense fleets were being destroyed. 12 billion people lived on Altaria Prime, and the planet was one of the most important trading centers in the outer areas of the galaxy. If it fell, the Zethkar would control trade routes to dozens of other star systems. Jake had heard about the Zethkar Dominion many times during his years serving in Earth's secret fleet. They were a warrior race that had been conquering other species for the past 50 years and now controlled 17 different star systems. Their ships were powerful and their soldiers were cruel, and they never showed mercy to anyone. Who stood in their way Captain Danny Walsh, who served as Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, had been sending reports about the Zethkar for months. He warned that they were planning something big, and that the other alien races were not taking the threat seriously enough. The major powers in the galaxy thought their own fleets were strong enough to handle any problem, but Danny knew better. The truth was that most alien species still thought of humans as a weak and primitive race. Earth had been part of the Galactic Council for 300 years, but the other members never asked for human opinions about important matters. They saw human ships as small and fragile, and human weapons as outdated compared to their advanced energy systems. What they did not know was that humanity had been preparing for war since the day they first met alien civilizations. While other species focused on trade and diplomacy, humans had been building weapons and training soldiers and designing new types of spacecraft that could fight and win against any enemy. In the galaxy, Chief Engineer Bobby Kim was already running full diagnostics on all the ship's systems before Jake even gave the order. Bobby knew that if they were going into battle, every piece of equipment needed to work perfectly, because there would be no second chances. The Defiance was the newest and most advanced ship in Earth's fleet, but it had never been tested in real combat against alien forces. The ship's main weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Instead of energy beams or plasma cannons, the Defiance carried kinetic bombardment systems that could fire tungsten rods at incredible speeds. The rods were only a few feet long, but when they hit a target at 30% of light speed, they could punch through any known type of armor or shielding. Communications Officer Amy Santos was monitoring alien radio channels and picking up more details about the battle at Altaria Prime. The Zethkar had brought 200 ships, including their most powerful vessel, called the Void Render. The Altarian Defense Fleet had started with 80 ships, but now only 30 were still fighting, and they were running out of ammunition and fuel. Jake walked over to the tactical display where Lisa was showing him the layout of the Altaria system. The planet was in the center, with 2 small moons and an asteroid belt that could provide cover for smaller ships. The Zethkar fleet was spread out around the planet, trying to prevent any escape ships from leaving with refugees. The Admiral looked at each member of his bridge crew and saw the same expression on every face. They were ready for this moment, and they had been training for it their entire careers. Earth had stayed quiet and peaceful for 3 centuries, while secretly building the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Helen Brooks was checking the exotic matter reactors that powered the ship's defensive systems. Human shields were completely different from the energy barriers used by other species. Instead of trying to stop incoming fire with pure energy, human shields created small distortions in space and time that could bend projectiles away from the ship or absorb their energy and convert it into power. Lieutenant Chris Parker was already plotting a course to the Altaria system that would bring them out of hyperspace in the best position to help the defenders. The trip would take 6 hours at maximum speed, and Chris wanted to arrive where they could do the most damage to the enemy fleet as quickly as possible. Jake opened a communication channel to Earth Command and spoke directly to Fleet Admiral Howard Clark, who was waiting for his report. The Admiral explained the situation at Altaria Prime and requested permission to engage the Zethkar fleet with full military force. For a moment, there was silence on the channel, and then Howard gave the answer Jake was hoping for. Permission was granted, and Earth was finally ready to show the galaxy what human military power could really do. The Defiance began powering up its hyperspace engines while Bobby Kim made final checks on the weapon systems and defensive arrays. Every member of the crew knew that when they arrived at Altaria Prime, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. As the stars began to stretch into lines of light around the ship, Jake Morrison smiled for the first time in months. The alien races had dismissed Earth as weak and primitive, but they were about to learn that humans had spent 300 years preparing for war, and now the time had come to fight. The hyperspace journey to Altaria Prime took exactly 6 hours and 12 minutes, but for the crew of the ESS Defiance, it felt much longer. Admiral Jake Morrison spent most of the trip studying intelligence reports about Zethkar military tactics, while his officers prepared their stations for what would be the first real test of human military power against a major alien force. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Altaria system, the sight that greeted them was worse than anyone had expected. The once beautiful planet was surrounded by the wreckage of destroyed ships, and the space around it glowed red from the fires of battle. Explosions lit up the darkness as the remaining Altarian defenders fought desperately against overwhelming odds. Communications Officer Amy Santos immediately began scanning for friendly signals and found 28 Altarian ships still fighting near the planet's north pole. The Zethkar fleet had grown to over 200 vessels since the battle began, and they were positioned in 3 main groups around Altaria Prime. Their flagship, the Void Render, was holding position directly above the planet's capital city commander. Lisa Rodriguez activated the ship's advanced sensor arrays and began analyzing the tactical situation. The Altarian defense fleet was down to less than 30 ships, and most of them showed heavy damage on the scanners. Evacuation transports were still trying to lift refugees off the planet's surface, but Zethkar fighters were hunting them down. One by one, Lieutenant Chris Parker plotted an intercept course that would take the Defiance directly through the center of the largest enemy formation. The other bridge officers looked at each other with concern, because the plan seemed like suicide, but Jake Morrison nodded his approval. Sometimes the best strategy was to do exactly what the enemy would never expect. G.R. Helen Brooks was monitoring the ship's defensive systems from her science station and watching the exotic matter reactors that powered their shields. The energy readings were stable, and the space-time distortion generators were working perfectly. Unlike other species who used simple energy barriers, humans had learned to bend reality itself to protect their ship's chief. Engineer Bobby Kim reported that all weapon systems were charged and ready for combat. The kinetic bombardment arrays were loaded with tungsten rods, and the magnetic acceleration coils were generating the massive amounts of power needed to fire projectiles at 30% of light speed. The railgun batteries were also online and ready to engage smaller targets as the Defiance moved deeper into the system. Amy Santos picked up a transmission from the surviving Altarian commanders. Fleet Admiral Zarthik was leading what remained of his forces in a final desperate attack on the Zethkar blockade ships. His voice sounded tired and defeated as he coordinated the last evacuation flights from the planet's surface. The human battleship continued its approach toward the main enemy formation while staying hidden behind its advanced stealth systems. The cloaking technology used gravitational field manipulation to bend light around the ship, making it invisible to most types of sensors. The Zethkar had no idea that death was approaching them from the outer system. Jake Morrison studied the enemy fleet composition on the main tactical display and noted that the aliens were using standard formation patterns from their military textbooks. The Zethkar were confident in their victory and had become careless about defensive positioning. Their ships were spread out to maximize their firepower coverage, but this also made them vulnerable to a concentrated attack. Captain Danny Walsh, who had been monitoring Galactic Council communications, reported that no other species were sending help to Alteria Prime. The major powers were either too far away to respond in time, or they were afraid of provoking the Zethkar Dominion. Humanity was the only force in the galaxy willing to stand up to the alien conquerors. Defiance was now only 10 minutes away from the optimal attack position, and Jake could see the enemy ships growing larger on the viewing screen. The Zethkar vessels were sleek and deadly-looking with curved hulls covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. They looked much more advanced than human ships, but appearances could be deceiving. Weapons. Officer Tony Silva ran final checks on the targeting computers and confirmed that all enemy vessels were locked in the firing solution. The ship's artificial intelligence had calculated the exact trajectory needed for each tungsten rod to hit its target, and the probability of success was over 90% for the first Salvo. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy was preparing his Marine units in case boarding actions became necessary, while Tactical Specialist Nancy Davis coordinated the point defense systems that would protect the Defiance from enemy counterattacks. Every crew member knew their job, and they had trained for this moment thousands of times in simulations. Amy Santos detected increased chatter on Zethkar communication channels as their fleet prepared for the final assault on the remaining Alterian defenders. The alien commanders were discussing how to divide up the conquered territory and which ships would have the honor of bombarding the planet's major cities. They had no idea that their plans were about to be interrupted 3 minutes before the attack. Jake Morrison opened a secure channel to the surviving Alterian forces and spoke directly to Fleet Admiral Zarthik. His voice was calm and confident as he identified himself as the commander of an Earth vessel coming to assist in the defense of Alteria Prime. The alien officer sounded confused because he had never heard of humans having warships powerful enough to face. The Zethkar Admiral explained that his ship would be decloaking in 2 minutes and that all friendly forces should clear the engagement zone immediately. He promised that the Defiance would do everything possible to drive off the enemy fleet and protect the evacuation transports. Zarthik agreed to pull his ships back, but warned that the human vessel would be facing impossible odds. As the final seconds counted down, Jake looked around the bridge at his crew and felt proud of every man and woman serving under his command. They were about to show the galaxy that humanity was not the weak and primitive species that everyone believed them to be. The age of human military power was about to begin. The stealth systems deactivated, and the ESS Defiance appeared like a ghost materializing in the middle of the Zethkar formation. For a moment, there was complete silence on all communication channels as both sides tried to understand what had just happened. Then Jake Morrison's voice cut through the darkness of space with words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The moment the ESS Defiance decloaked in the middle of the Zethkar formation, confusion spread through the alien fleet like wildfire. Admiral Kethmer, commanding from the bridge of the massive dreadnought Void Render, stared at his tactical displays. trying to understand how a single ship had appeared without warning in the center of his carefully arranged battle formation. The human battleship looked small compared to the Zethkar heavy cruisers that surrounded it, and its design appeared crude and primitive to alien eyes. The hull was angular and covered with what looked like simple armor plating, while the weapon ports seemed tiny compared to the massive plasma cannon arrays on the Dominion warships. Kethmer allowed himself a moment of amusement at the foolishness of these unknown aliens. That amusement lasted exactly 4 seconds before everything changed forever. Weapons. Officer Tony Silva had been waiting for this moment his entire career, and when Admiral Jake Morrison gave the command to fire, he did not hesitate for even a split second. The Defiance unleashed its primary armament in a coordinated salvo that lit up space with brilliant flashes of accelerated metal moving at incredible speeds. The tungsten rods fired from the kinetic bombardment systems were each only 3 feet long and 6 inches wide, but they had been accelerated to 30% of light speed by the ship's magnetic rail arrays. When they struck the Zethkar vessels, the results were beyond anything the aliens had ever experienced in combat. The first rod punched completely through the heavy cruiser bone, crushed her from nose to stern without slowing down, and continued into empty space. The second and third rods hit the destroyer's swift death and literally vaporized the entire forward section of the ship. The fourth rod struck the cruiser dark wing amidships, and the alien vessel broke apart in a massive explosion that lit up half the battle zone. Within seconds, 6 enemy ships had been destroyed outright, and 12 more were spinning helplessly with critical damage to their hulls and power systems. The Zethkar had never encountered kinetic weapons that could ignore their energy shields and punch through their advanced armor as if it was made of thin metal. Foil Admiral Kethmer watched his tactical display in complete disbelief as damage. Reports flooded in from his fleet commanders. The human projectiles had not just penetrated his ship's defenses, they had completely ignored them. Energy shields that could stop plasma cannons and particle beams were useless against simple metal rods moving at relativistic speeds, Commander. Lisa Rodriguez was already tracking the next wave of targets, while the ship's artificial intelligence calculated firing solutions for the secondary weapon systems. The railgun batteries opened fire and sent streams of smaller projectiles toward the enemy fighters and corvettes that were trying to organize a counterattack. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy watched from the Marine Bay as enemy ships exploded on the main viewing screens, while Tactical Specialist Nancy Davis coordinated the point defense systems that would protect the Defiance from incoming fire. Every member of the crew was performing their duties with the precision that came from years of training and preparation. The Zethkar fleet finally began to respond to the devastating attack, but their weapons were designed to fight other energy-based civilizations, and they were not prepared for human military technology. Antimatter torpedoes streaked toward the Defiance, followed by quantum disruptor beams and gravity weapons that could crush conventional starships. Chief Engineer Bobby Kim smiled as he watched the defensive systems absorb the incoming attacks without even straining the ship's power reserves. The hull was made from compressed carbon nanotube matrices that were stronger than any known material, while gravitational field generators converted enemy fire into additional energy for the ship's own systems. Dr. Helen Brooks monitored the exotic matter reactors from her science station and noted that the defensive shields were actually gaining power from the Zethkar weapons fire. The space-time distortion fields around the ship bent reality itself to protect the Defiance, and the harder the enemy fired, the stronger the human defenses became. Communications Officer Amy Santos intercepted messages between enemy ship commanders and could hear the panic in their voices as they tried to understand what was happening to their fleet. The aliens had expected an easy victory against primitive human technology, but instead they were watching their most powerful vessels being destroyed by weapons they could not comprehend. Admiral Morrison opened a communication channel to the Zethkar flagship, and his voice carried across space with calm authority. He identified himself as Jake Morrison of Earth and gave Admiral Kethmer exactly 30 seconds to begin withdrawing his fleet from the Altaria system, or face the consequences of continued human military action. The alien commander responded with threats and demands to know how many ships the humans had brought to the battle, but Jake simply smiled and ordered another salvo from the kinetic bombardment systems. 6 more tungsten rods accelerated to incredible speeds and struck their targets with devastating precision. Heavy cruiser Terrorbringers split in half when a rod hit its main reactor, while the battleship Iron Fang lost its entire weapons section to another perfectly placed shot. The destroyer pack leader Night Hunter simply vanished in a cloud of expanding plasma when multiple rods struck it. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Chris Parker had been maneuvering the Defiance through the enemy formation with skills that amazed even his fellow officers, while Weapons Officer Tony Silva continued to fire the ship's various weapon systems with deadly accuracy. The human battleship moved like a predator among prey, cutting through the Zethkar fleet with unstoppable Force Captain Danny Walsh monitored communications from the surviving Altarian defenders and could hear the amazement in their voices as they watched a single human ship destroy the fleet that had been defeating them for hours. Fleet Admiral Zarthik transmitted his thanks to the Defiance and promised that the Altarian Republic would remember this day forever. Battle was turning into a rout as more and more Zethkar ships broke formation and tried to escape from the human vessel that was systematically destroying their fleet. Admiral Kethmer finally realized that his forces were facing technology that was generations ahead of anything in the known galaxy when the Void Renderer tried to target the Defiance. With its main plasma cannon, the beam simply bent around the human ship and dissipated harmlessly into space. The gravitational distortion fields protecting the vessel were more advanced than anything the Zethkar had ever encountered, and their most powerful weapons were completely useless. After 20 minutes of one-sided combat, Admiral Morrison gave the order to cease fire and opened communications to the remaining enemy vessels. His message was simple and direct. Any ship that did not begin immediate withdrawal from the system would be destroyed without further warning. The surviving Zethkar commanders needed no additional encouragement and began retreating toward the edge of the system as fast as their damaged ships could manage. Admiral Kethmer transmitted a final message promising that the Dominion would remember this humiliation and that humanity had made a powerful enemy. Jake Morrison watched the alien fleet flee into hyperspace and knew that everything had changed forever. The galaxy had just witnessed the true power of human military technology, and word of this battle would spread to every corner of civilized space within days. News of the battle at Altaria Prime spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined possible. Within 6 hours, every major intelligence agency in civilized space had received sensor recordings of the engagement, and analysts were working around the clock, trying to understand what they had witnessed. Captain Eric Taylor, commanding the Earth Intelligence Vessel, ESS, Monitor, was intercepting communications between the most powerful alien civilizations as they struggled to process the implications of humanity's sudden display of military superiority. The Hegemony Council had called emergency sessions, while the Crystalline Collective was demanding immediate access to human technology. The ancient ethereal assembly, who had controlled galactic politics for over 1,000 years, were meeting in secret session on their hidden homeworld, trying to decide how to respond to this new threat to their dominance. Their psychic abilities had not detected any signs of human military advancement, and they were shocked to discover that an entire species had been preparing for war without their knowledge aboard. The ESS Defiance Admiral Jake Morrison was reading reports from intelligence operatives throughout the galaxy and watching as the political landscape shifted in real time. The Zethkar Dominion had been the most feared military force in known space for 50 years, but a single human battleship had destroyed nearly a quarter of their fleet and forced the rest to retreat in complete defeat. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Patricia White was treating the few injuries sustained during the battle and marveling at how little damage the Defiance had taken, despite facing over 200 enemy vessels. Most of the crew had only minor bruises from the ship's incredible acceleration capabilities, while the vessel itself showed no significant battle damage. The surviving Altarian commanders, led by Fleet Admiral Zarthik, had transmitted formal thanks to Earth, along with complete tactical data about the Defiance's performance during the engagement. The information showed that the human battleship had single-handedly destroyed 43 enemy vessels and damaged dozens more, while sustaining 0 casualties. Intelligence Officer Kate Morgan was decoding intercepted transmissions from across the galaxy and discovering that every major power was now reassessing their relationship with humanity. The species they had dismissed as primitive and weak had just demonstrated military capabilities that surpassed anything in their own arsenals. Galactic Council had called an emergency session for the first time in 200 years, and representatives from 50 different civilizations were traveling to the neutral meeting world to discuss the implications of human military power. Some species wanted to form immediate alliances with Earth, while others were calling for action against what they saw as a potential threat on Earth. President Howard Clark was meeting with the Global Defense Council and discussing whether to reveal more about humanity's true military capabilities or continue maintaining the illusion that the Defiance was their only advanced warship. The secret fleet hidden throughout the solar system included over 300 vessels of various classes. Commander Lisa Rodriguez had been promoted to captain of her own battleship, the ESS Retribution, and was already conducting joint training exercises with Altarian defense forces. The aliens were amazed by human tactics that emphasized overwhelming firepower and technological superiority over traditional energy-based combat systems. The revelation of Earth's military strength had triggered what historians would later call the Great Realignment, as every major power in the galaxy reconsidered their strategic positions and alliances. The Zethkar Dominion had withdrawn from 12 conquered systems because they feared encountering more human vessels in those territories. Helen Brooks, now serving as Director of Xenotechnology Research, was working with alien scientists who wanted to understand human defensive systems that could convert incoming weapons fire into additional power for their own ships. The combination of human engineering with alien materials promised revolutionary advances. The Ethereal Assembly had formally proposed a mutual defense treaty with humanity after analyzing the battle data and realizing that their own fleets would be no match for kinetic weapons technology. Their energy-based shields and armor systems were completely useless against metal projectiles moving at 30% of light speed. Chief Engineer Bobby Kim was studying requests from dozens of alien species who wanted to trade rare materials for human defensive technology, but Earth Command had decided to keep their most advanced systems classified for national security reasons. The gravitational field generators and space-time distortion systems would remain. Human Secrets Communications Officer Amy Santos was monitoring alien news broadcasts and listening as commentators struggled to explain how humanity had developed such advanced military capabilities without anyone noticing. Many species were accusing their own intelligence services of massive failures in threat assessment. The Crystalline Collective had opened formal trade negotiations with Earth, offering access to rare minerals found only in their distant nebula territories in exchange for kinetic weapons technology. Their crystal-based ships were even more vulnerable to tungsten rods and conventional metal. Hull's Captain Danny Walsh was attending meetings at the Galactic Council headquarters, where alien representatives who had barely acknowledged human presence for 3 centuries were now treating him like one of the most important diplomats in civilized space. The change in attitude was dramatic, and somewhat amusing Lieutenant Chris. Parker had been assigned to pilot one of the new stealth reconnaissance ships that would monitor alien fleet movements throughout the galaxy. Wow. Weapons Officer Tony Silva was training alien gunners in the basics of kinetic warfare during joint military exercises. The Hegemony Council had quietly approached Earth about forming a strategic alliance against the Zethkar Dominion and other potential threats, while simultaneously trying to gather intelligence about human fleet strength and deployment patterns. Their diplomatic messages were polite, but carried undertones of fear. Tactical Specialist Nancy Davis was working with alien engineers to develop hybrid point defense systems that combined human kinetic interceptors with alien energy shields for maximum effectiveness against all types of weapons. The collaborative projects were producing impressive results. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy was training mixed human-alien marine units for boarding operations and ground combat, while observing that most alien species had focused so heavily on space warfare that their ground forces were poorly equipped and trained compared to human standards. As reports continued flowing in from across the galaxy, Admiral Morrison realized that the battle at Alteria Prime had changed everything about humanity's place in the galactic community. The species that had been ignored and dismissed for 3 centuries was now seen as one of the most powerful military forces in known space. The age of human ascendancy had begun not through diplomacy or gradual technological progress, but through a single devastating display of military superiority that had shaken every established power structure in the galaxy and forced the entire civilized universe to acknowledge that Earth was no longer a minor player in galactic affairs. 6 months after the Battle of Alteria Prime, the galactic political landscape had been completely transformed, and humanity found itself at the center of a new era of interstellar relations. The Zethkar Dominion had withdrawn from 12 conquered systems, and their expansion had been halted by the mere possibility of encountering more human vessels in those territories. Admiral Jake Morrison now commanded a squadron of 5 Earth battleships and was attending the Grand Assembly on the neutral world of Kepler Station, where alien delegates who had once barely acknowledged human presence were now hanging on every word spoken by Earth's representatives. The change in attitude was remarkable and showed just how much military power could alter diplomatic relationships. The ESS Defiance had become famous throughout the galaxy, and its name was spoken with respect and fear in equal measure by alien species who had witnessed recordings of its devastating attack on the Zethkar fleet. Young human officers were being recruited by alien governments who wanted to learn about kinetic warfare and advanced defensive systems. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was commanding her own battleship, the ESS Retribution, and leading joint training exercises with Alterian and other allied fleets who were eager to learn human tactics that emphasized overwhelming firepower and technological superiority over traditional energy-based combat methods. The results of these exercises were impressive and showed clear advantages for kinetic weapons. The revelation of Earth's military capabilities had triggered what historians were already calling the Great Realignment, as every major power in the galaxy reconsidered their strategic positions and began forming new alliances based on the reality of human military dominance. Old enemies were becoming friends, while former allies were reassessing their relationships. The ethereal assembly previously, the galaxy's dominant power had formally proposed a mutual defense treaty with humanity after their psychic leaders analyzed the battle data and realized that their own fleets would be completely helpless against human kinetic weapons technology. Their energy shields and plasma armor were useless against tungsten rods, moving at 30% of light speed. Dr. Helen Brooks, now serving as Director of Xenotechnology Research, was working with the brightest alien scientists in the galaxy to develop hybrid technologies that combined human engineering principles with alien material science. The projects were producing revolutionary advances in spacecraft design and defensive systems that promised to benefit all species. Crystalline Collective had opened extensive trade negotiations, with Earth offering rare minerals found only in their distant nebula territories in exchange for access to human military technology. Their crystal-based ships were even more vulnerable to kinetic weapons than conventional metal hulls, and they desperately needed human defensive systems. Chief Engineer Bobby Kim was overseeing the construction of new shipyards in the asteroid belt where human and alien workers were building hybrid vessels that incorporated the best technologies from multiple species. The cooperation was unprecedented in galactic history and was producing ships that were more advanced than anything previously imagined communications. Officer Amy Santos had been promoted to head of the new Interspecies Communication Division and was working to establish standardized protocols for joint military operations between human and alien forces. The language barriers and cultural differences were significant challenges, but progress was being made. The Hegemony Council had quietly approached Earth about forming a strategic alliance against remaining threats while simultaneously trying to gather intelligence about human fleet strength and deployment patterns throughout the galaxy. Their diplomatic messages were respectful, but carried clear undertones of both admiration and concern. Captain Danny Walsh was now serving as Earth's senior ambassador to the Galactic Council and had been given a seat on the ruling executive board for the first time in human history. The other council members treated him as an equal and consulted him on all major decisions affecting galactic security and trade. Lieutenant Chris Parker had been assigned to command one of the new stealth reconnaissance ships that monitored alien fleet movements throughout the galaxy while gathering intelligence on potential threats to Earth and its allies. The information gathered by these missions was helping to maintain galactic peace weapons. Officer Tony Silva was running training programs for alien gunners who wanted to learn the basics of kinetic warfare during joint military exercises that were becoming increasingly common as more species sought to modernize their defense forces with human assistance. The Zethkar Dominion had become a shadow of its former self, with Admiral Kethmer facing court-martial for his defeat at Alteria Prime and many of their conquered territories declaring independence now that they no longer feared Dominion retaliation. The balance of power had shifted dramatically tactical. Specialist Nancy Davis was working with alien engineers to develop new point defense systems that combined human kinetic interceptors with alien energy shields for maximum effectiveness against all types of weapons. The hybrid systems were being installed on ships throughout the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy was commanding mixed human-alien Marine units that were being deployed to trouble spots across the galaxy where his forces were maintaining peace and protecting civilian populations from various threats. The international cooperation was working well. President Howard Clark had decided to reveal the existence of Earth's full military fleet, which included over 300 vessels of various classes hidden throughout the solar system. The announcement sent shock waves through alien governments who realized they had underestimated human capabilities by an even greater margin than they had imagined. As Captain Walsh addressed the assembled delegates at the Grand Assembly, his words carried weight that no human speech had ever possessed before in galactic history. He spoke of Earth's commitment to defending innocent civilians and maintaining peace, while making it clear that humanity possessed both the capability and the will to enforce that peace. The age of human ascendancy was no longer a future possibility, but a present reality as Earth took its place among the great powers of the galaxy, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the demonstration of overwhelming military capability tempered by moral purpose and a genuine desire to protect weaker species. The galaxy had trembled when Earth's battleship entered the battlefield at Alteria Prime, but from that trembling had emerged a new era of cooperation and mutual respect, where humanity served as both protector and partner to civilizations. that had once dismissed them as primitive and weak trade routes that had been controlled by the Zethkar Dominion were now protected by joint human-alien patrol fleets, while former enemy species were working together on scientific research projects that promised to benefit everyone. The transformation was remarkable and showed what could be achieved when military strength was combined with diplomatic wisdom. Future looked brighter than ever before, as humanity embraced its role as one of the galaxy's leading powers, while remaining committed to the principles of justice and protection for all sentient beings, regardless of their species or technological development level. Earth had claimed its place among the stars, and the universe would never be the same.